Okay, so let's start painting this guy. And I want to go for some blue cloth and some gold accents. And then we'll finish this up with some black dragon skin. Okay, and to start I want to roughly sketch the blue cloth that I'll have here, just because that is something that will be rather hard to reach later down in the process, as you can basically see here by me getting a bit of the color onto the surrounding metals already. And I don't really care too much here, as that will get a lot of paint later on. And if you know about my painting style, you will know that I don't really care for a perfectly opaque and fully covering base coat. This is basically already part of something in the midtones, and for the shadows we will just use the underpainting that I have on this mini already. Love to have you so already painted this guy here on my last stream, getting back into streaming, and now I'm for the second Dragonborn basically here of Dragon Trapper's Lodge current campaign. And these minis, for my liking, have been quite nice. They are detailed so that you have something to paint, but they're not just overloaded with details, which just make the mini too busy without actually yielding any additional interest on the miniature that you would need. Hey Indigo, thank you very much. It's all a thing of practice. So I've got into painting when I was a teenager, and I basically begged my mom to buy me the Lord of the Rings miniatures from Games Workshop, and then I stopped. I got back into Magic and spending all my students' money on playing Magic. But then through the years I always did some painting. I sometimes painted some board game miniatures. I sometimes painted something onto Magic cards, and basically never stopped painting. But I wasn't good, so I just liked to paint. And then I think 3 years ago by now, a friend of mine basically peer pressured me into getting back into wargaming, and so I picked up some miniatures and really got into painting again. And so for the last, let's say, 2.5 years, I just painted a bunch of miniatures and I'm really hooked again. What type of deck do you have? Currently I mostly play Cube in Magic, so I have something to draft for my friends. I have a lot of guys in my friend group who played Magic when they were younger, but they have stopped, so they don't have cards anymore. So it's always good to just say, hey, let's take my cards, let's just play around. But I also play Canadian Highlander, and there I currently mostly play some form of Black Red or Grixis mid-range or tempo decks. And basically, if we continue to play, to paint and talk about Magic here, this is my main two hobbies, so I'm very happy doing that. Basically, as you can see, I'm not really painting into the deepest recesses here. I'm just getting some midtones ready, and I will make quite stark jumps into brighter blues. Just try to get a first feel for how light would interact with fabric here. And let's see. That is part of the straps. That is also part of the straps. Sometimes I think it's not too easy if you just have them quite dark to actually notice what you are painting at the moment, but I think those two things here are leather straps from the harness on the front, and the rest is fabric. And I also decided to just go for two, or to just do them both in blue. So I don't really intend to differentiate them by color, because I think a lot of the times, if especially lower down the model, you have some additional kind of fabric that you just want to do in another color just because it's a different piece of fabric, you can draw attention to the feet of the model or the most boring part of the model. And if you look at this model from the front, I think what I want to highlight is a part here around the head, because the head is nice, the armor plates are nice. I don't really care about the things here lower down. And the same thing is true if I look at the back of the model. I really like this part of the cloak here. I like these shoulder pauldrons with the military stripes. I like the horns. That is what could should draw the attention. I don't want to draw extra attention to the different kinds of fabrics lower down. How do you decide which colors to use to make these details pops? I paint orcs and I paint them orange, but it's hard for me to make them look as interesting. That's a very good question. So basically, when I paint something, I try to get some colors locked in. If I'm painting an orc, I know I want to paint the skin green, so that's the first color that I'm working on. Here on this model, I thought about I want to do some blue, as I just haven't painted blue fabric in a while, and so that is what I started with. And then I'm basically working from there, thinking, okay, blue fabric really works nice with gold details, because then you have the contrast of a colder kind of fabric with a very warm metal. That always looks quite nice. And then I know, okay, I have blue fabric, I have gold metals, and then I can basically work from there. So that is the first thing. I try to get my colors down sequentially, just from my thought process, and I try to think which colors would work nice. And then for details specifically, I think it's always a good question to think, do I want to, which parts of the model do I want to highlight? Is there something specifically where I want to introduce a new color? So let's say on this guy that I just painted recently, I wanted to do this small stone here on his head in a different color to draw attention, but I still wanted it to be a color that is already on the model to make it all feel more coherent. So I've chosen this teal color that I already have in the verdigris of the armor, and that way I have basically a more coherent paint job that still draws attention to the face where I actually want the attention. Not the easiest model to paint here with the sword covering a bit of the cloth, but we will make do. You can see I just basically jumped from doing the midtones on the fabric to already painting some highlights, and that is something that you will see me doing quite a lot. So I don't really work in only opaque layers. I always try to think, where do I need some more light? Where do I need some more color? And then just jumping around a bit. And if something looks good, but it's not fully opaque, I really don't care. I think that's even an advantage because I'm getting some additional interest without spending more time in first getting one layer fully opaque and then going back and trying to blend it in. So I try to use the transparency of the paints a bit to my advantage, basically save time by getting blends just from basically the faults of the paint. You can always also just incorporate some wet blending. If you're painting a piece of cloth like this one, of course you have these recesses, but the recess is still facing like 90% upwards, so light from the sun would still just hit it, basically like everything else. So you won't really have a big shadow down there. That is something that when you first get into miniature painting, sometimes you tend to basically do this pillow shading. So you just go, everything that is a raised surface gets brighter, everything that's lower down gets darker. And of course that is a part of what we want to do to highlight the actual geometry of the model a bit more. But we always have to keep in mind how light would actually hit the model. And so a big fold like this would still be plenty bright, so I don't go too dark in here. I mean, when you are placing shadows, basically you have to, you can think about it in a variety of ways. It also depends on the painting style, but Basically what I try to do is I want them based in reality. So I try to have highlights and shadows that are mostly realistic, but I try to accentuate them a little bit more just to have a model that pops a bit more than something that would be 100% realistic, just to account for the scale that we're working on. And when you do that, a real good part to start the process is really to basically look at the model, let's see, like this, from straight up. And then think, okay, everything that I can now see, that will get plenty of light from the sun, if you're working with just a light source from above. So nothing that I'm seeing right now should be in deep shadows. And then we can basically do the same thing and just tilt it a little bit around. Everything that I can now see should still be plenty bright. And then the other way around, everything that I'm seeing like this, those should all be things in the shadows. And if you start with that, you have a very good first idea on how to place your shadows and your highlights. And of course, if you're then thinking about there is a specific fold that I want to highlight a bit more to define it a bit more, or there's some detail that I want to draw additional attention on, then of course you can also paint that a bit brighter just for the additional contrast. Indigo Violet 07, thank you very much for subscribing. I appreciate it a lot. And I will try to get these streams to a more regular fixture. I'm not yet sure on specific days or anything, but I really enjoy painting and talking about what I paint and why I paint. So expect more of these. Okay, now let's say something like the cloth that is below the hand here, that will be a bit more in the shadows because it's just a bit more occluded when I'm looking at it. And because of that, I want to go for some darker colors here, but still it won't be totally dark. The arm is not that wide that it will cover everything, but getting bit of a darker shade in there will help get this to feel a bit like a physical object in actual space. Let's see if I can reach this. I don't yet have a fixed schedule, so the timing that I'm doing right now, so yeah, from now on, like 2 hours will be the typical timing because this works kind of good for me. Generally, I think I will stream on Mondays, but I'm not yet fully decided on that. So maybe I will have some semi-fixed day where I always try to stream, and then some spontaneous streams around the week when I have time. But I sadly cannot commit to something yet. Okay, and then for like folds like these, I will now try to just blend them in just a tiny bit by glazing in some mid-tone of blue over the fold. Let's do the same thing roughly around here. And then we have another part here. Okay, and I think we are getting to a very nice result already. So let's try to extend this a bit further up the model. Now here I would have some highlight basically on the part where the shoulders wrap around. Then we will have some mid-tone here, because, well, even though this is perfectly visible, light will come from above, it will just not hit as much, so it will be a bit darker. But whenever there is like a small fold, that fold will catch a lot of light from above. So we can try to get those very bright. That should give us a good feel for the gloss. Get that in a bit. Okay. Same thing now for the arms here. And on those I will probably be a bit more stark in contrast than is actually realistic, just to highlight that there are big folds. So the parts that I'm leaving dark here should probably not be as dark in actual physical space. But I think it makes it look a bit more interesting to get the nice sculpted detail here. Again, I think that's plenty. Let's go further. And here, even though this is a bit in the recess, this would still catch a lot of light, just because it's not really obscuring something from above. So even though it's a bit harder to reach, I will try to get the highlight quite bright here. And then doing the same thing for the other side here. Even though that's the part that I have a bit of trouble reaching, especially on camera. Okay. And then again. Then we have this collar of his. And for that one I will leave the inside rather dark. Again, that's not necessarily mostly realistic, but it will get nice contrast against the skin later down the line. So I just try to highlight the part that's actually raised to the sun. Roughly like this. Okay. Second arm I didn't do fully, so what brand of brush am I using? I'm using avant-garde brushes. I don't know if these are commonly available by now. They were a Kickstarter release. I think they're currently fulfilling those Kickstarter orders, but they should have them in stock quite soonish. And even though take this with a grain of salt, because I got them sent for free, these are actually the best brushes that I've used in quite a while. They sent me 2 of each. I'm still on my first set, as they are keeping a very, very sharp tip for a nice amount of time. So I'm really quite happy with those brushes. Okay, I think this color has some some wrinkles as well. So I will try basically to highlight the upper part of the wrinkle. I don't want to highlight the protruding part. I want to highlight the side of the wrinkle that is facing towards the sun. Because that is what makes it catch light. It's not catching light because it's further out, it's catching light because it's angled in the right direction. Okay. I'm only now noticing that this does not seem to be a symmetric part of the armor, so let me give that a look on an image of the model. Oh, it is, but I got too far here, so I will have to get that dark again for my later layers. That's what happens when you just start on the dark model and are not looking at it closely enough. But let's just repair that. Basically trying to recreate the color of my underpainting here. So some dark purple should do the trick. And while doing this, I will also try to fix some of the mistakes I've just done with the blue. I noticed that when you highlight, you do it with lines and strokes. Is it something you normally do when highlighting? Is it because you're painting the gloss? Yeah, that's a very good question. So basically two things. The first thing is that I like it when you are seeing that my miniatures are painted. So I am happy with it if you are seeing brush strokes and getting a bit of, let's call it artistic flair on there. So I'm not too worried with perfect smooth blends and having it a bit painterly is fine for me. But yeah, the second thing is also the texture. So whenever I'm painting some surface or some material, I try to think of the type of surface that texture that material would have. And so for cloth, I basically like to do, so let's try to do it, let's say like here, to basically do some cross hatching. So when I started doing my highlights in one direction, I will often later down the line try to go for the other direction as well. And basically have brush strokes in two directions to get the feeling of some woven cloth that you can see the minute texture on that you would have for a material like that. Okay, and I really want to get a feel for how the miniature is supposed to look. So the next thing that I will try to get is some metallics. And as I already said, I want this guy to mostly be in blue and gold. So I will now try to paint some gold on here. And I basically always paint in non-metallic metal, so this will not be any different. And for my gold, I like to first get in some warmth on all the surfaces that are supposed to be gold and would be hit by the sun or my primary light source, but I'm often just using the sun. So you will see I'm just getting some reds on here. Or really trying to think about where I will have my reflections. Now for the second part, I will go for a smaller brush. And I will now try to get a first part of our first sketch of the reflections. Any particular piece of metallics. And so let's first look at a cool angle. And I think this is a cool angle to look at this guy. So basically I'm now fixing that angle, and I will now try to make a first sketch of the reflections that I will have here. That will notice that now for the gold I will have less visible brush strokes, as I want that to be a little bit smoother. There will some strokes still visible, but not nearly as much as for the gloss. And I think the humidity in my room is quite low at the moment, so my color is drying very fast. So I'll now try to mix in a little bit of a slow drying thinner in here, just to have a little bit more working time. So now you will notice that I'm now basically doing a mix of layering and glazing. I'm not getting the same brightness on every spot that I hit. That is very much on purpose, as I really like to get a lot of difference in values just from painting with a single color. Do you still use metallic paint, or do you paint using NMM always? Basically, I always paint with NMM. I think I have painted like the last 200 models that I painted just fully in non-metallic metal. I sometimes see something painted with metallic colors, and I think, yeah, that's still looking cool. A lot of the stuff painted in the new, I think Vallejo True Metal colors also looks quite nice. But personally, I fully went down the rabbit hole of non-metallic metal and just fully committed. It's a different challenge. Yeah, it's definitely a different challenge. So you get a lot of practice, and if you have done it a lot, it becomes quite intuitive. But with a lot, I really mean a lot in that instance. So as I said, like 200 models that I've painted, I think after like 100, I had a very good grasp that I could just start painting this way and it would look good. But it's something to be approached differently than just using a metallic color and basically painting like normal. Okay, now to show why I love. If you paint something you don't like at first, do you repaint them or you just leave them and move on to the next model? Well, that's a very good question. I mostly just go to the next model. I have so much lying around that I want to get to paint at some time that I basically mostly just go to the next model. But I do have some models that I just thought, no, I don't like the direction this is taking, and just primed it again and painted it a second time. But it's not happening too often. Okay, now for the magic step. I have some orange thinned down, where it's basically a very vibrant yellowish tone. I'm just glazing it over my metallics that I've painted here. And I'm getting these super, super rich gold colors. Also, let's zoom in a little bit more. Also now try to get a bit of differentiation between different parts of my reflections. Also doing some orange over parts that I have not highlighted before, just to give the idea of some secondary reflections or some bounce light or stuff like that. Let's go for a second round at some of the places here. Now with that done, we can go back to the very bright color. And try to get some very bright contrast in there. Yeah, honestly, that step alone is like 90% of the reason why I love painting gold. It's just so satisfying to tie it all together with the orangey glaze. And then to get to the last step, I will go for some pure white. Get the last highlights in there. Okay, basically something like this. And of course now can do all kinds of detail improvements. So I think this could use a little bit more of the orange. Same for here. But roughly this is what I'm going for. And so let's continue this on even more of the armor. So again, starting with the red. Getting all the warmth in there that I want to have for this very rich gold. If you would make it a bit more yellow gold, which color will be using instead of the orange? Would a bright yellow work? Good question. Yeah, I think it would, but you would really have to take a look at the specific yellow color that you're using. A lot of yellows have some amount of white mixed into it. And if you use that for this filter or glazing step, you can get different effect than this orange that is very transparent that I was using. So you have to experiment a bit. Another idea would be to just not go for this red, but go for a bit of more of an ochre color. Basically do the ochre color, do the bright white, and then again go for some orangey yellow. I think that could work as well. So again, let's see. Thinking about the reflections. And we'll try to glaze this to the side a little bit. Basically trying to get some differentiation between the small spikes here. And it might very well be that I'm just now pushing it a little bit too far, because I now highlight quite the large amount of area, and non-metallic metal also lives a lot from having the stark contrast. So it is possible that I'm removing too much of my dark colors right now. But let's see. If I do, we'll fix that later down the line. Okay. Try to get the separation here a bit nicer. You have to be sure that this bright yellow that I paint on is fully dry before I continue with the orange filter, because otherwise I will get some of this in the mix and then I get a result that is a bit more chalky, than I would like. Okay. So I'll let that dry for another second and think about something else in the meantime. And again, I'm going for the same idea here on these arm pads, not sure how they're called. Okay, so again, for the magic step, let's get some of the orange in here. And again, I think this just ties everything together so nicely. Again, I'm using something like a glaze consistency here, so you have some wiggle room. Can try to get some more of the paint at a specific point, a bit less of the paint at another point. Basically, you have quite a bit of wiggle room here in applying this color. What we want to get is this very warm, very saturated color in the end. And again, make sure that you let this dry until you do further work on the metal. Okay, as I have alluded to earlier, try to think about a semi-consistent looking direction, basically. So as I have these done quite nicely, I want to have this part on the arm with reflections that are consistent to the ones that I've painted before. And so this is how I continue here. You can use that as another point where I use basically my brush strokes and the visibility of brush strokes, both to give form to the metal, but also as a blending technique. Because of course, where the brush strokes end, I will leave a bit more of the color. So this way I have some kind of gradient on here now. And I will basically jump back and forth, and while this is drying, I will give these the final touches. So again, first starting with my bright and white yellow. Often when you're using with these thin colors and you're making a mistake, you can just get the water slightly wet and just remove the mistake as you've made it. And now with this done, I can again go for my white just for the last very select highlights, just to push the contrast to the maximum. It's basically color placement. Color placement and contrast are the two important things for something to look metallic. Everything like smoothness is basically just important for the condition of the metallics, but not for giving the feel of metal. Okay, really like where this is going. So let's continue. And I hope it's not getting boring to watch me paint gold, but there will be a lot of gold on this model. I love your purple armored orcs. Thank you very much. I'm quite happy with them as well. But those are also something that basically had a lot of stages while I worked on them. So when I first started, I had the base idea of having this very intense purple with the very yellowish green for the skin as my main contrast, and that was always the same. But then the specifics of the purple and of the skin, and if I should have a tertiary color and how much of it, and all those things, they changed really a lot. And I'm to this day still experimenting when I'm painting my orcs. Let me give you a sneak peek of something that is not yet published, with just a few days to go until Golden Demon. So this guy will be one of my entries for Golden Demon, and I'm very happy with this guy. But here, basically now the special tone that I have on the magenta, it goes into quite the pinkish hues up here. I've added some of the teal that I have in the scales down here to the front to just have a bit more of a coherent composition, and I'm very stoked with this guy. So let's see if people like that as well. So kind of happy with that guy. I mean, you can basically go for the same color composition that I have here. So, I mean, ignore the teal for a second. But I am using orange, green and pink. And you could just as well go for orange skin, then this purple armor, and then go for some bright green or bright teal accents on smaller stuff. That would also give you quite the nice composition. So thank you very much, Overeat. Let me know how it goes. So all these painting competitions like Golden Demon are quite interesting for me, because I do think that I've got a quite recognizable style down by now, but I just can't be bothered to put 100+ hours in a miniature. So somewhere around 20-25 hours is the absolute maximum that I have spent on a miniature. And at that point I'm always thinking like, yeah, of course there is something small that I could still improve. But it's just killing my motivation. And then for a competition like Golden Demon, where the judges are very technical and they are basically spotting every mistake that you have done on a model, I have a bit of a problem, because there will always be some mistakes on my models. As long as they are looking cool and are looking stylistic, I go with Bob Ross's Happy Little Accidents, and I am not too worried about it. Oh, I actually didn't know that story of a skink that won a Golden Demon but then was stripped again. That is quite funny. Yeah, no, definitely imperfections are not necessarily a mistake in painting, but can also just be, again, basically, as I said, I sometimes like it when you see my brush strokes on my miniature. And I had these discussions before where basically someone told me, yeah, now this isn't blended perfectly. I think you should change that. And I was like, no, that is part of the style. I want it to look that way. Thank you very much for subscribing. Got to cut out early. So I had some struggles with the video on demand of the last stream that I did. I'll have to see if I can fix it. But the whole video will be on my YouTube channel for everyone to see. So you can definitely see the full video in the end, if you don't catch it here live. So don't worry about that. One thing I said earlier about basically just starting to paint and then getting a feel for the miniature and how it looks. There's also something I really like to basically, while painting, to explore the actual sculpt. And on this one, I think there are a lot of very nice subtle details in here. So like the metallics down here, having some scratch marks, then the different features of the metallic armor that is incorporated in a different way up here, where we have these spikes going inward and we have here the spikes going outward. And it's a very well sculpted miniature, so very, very happy to see this while painting. So now we are reaching a point where I want to draw a bit less attention to, because as I said before, I want most of the attention around the head and the shoulders. So I will going for a bit more muted N&M down here, but still I want this to fit in with the rest. So I try to give this a bit more texture, basically look a little more rough and worn, but use the same color palette to have this mixing up or matching up nicely at the end. Okay. Going for the final white here. On this part of the armor. I intended to get this model done in the 2 hours of the stream, but I'm basically enjoying painting the metallics too much. So let's see how far I get. Okay, so now taking some time to understand the model again. What is this part of the... Is it a triple layered thing, or is it part of the belt structure? This one going down here. I'm not 100% sure. So let's just go with what might look nicer in the end. Basically, I want to give this cloth a golden border, tie it in with all the armor that I'm painting. Maybe this will be a bit of a golden overkill in the end, but I like to imagine him as some leader figure, maybe even a paladin. And so I'm not too worried with him having too much style. For the gold border, I'm basically going for exactly the same idea as I am for the gold armor. So I'm trying to get it warm with the red, and then I will paint on the reflections and bring it all together with the orange-yellow wash or filter, to be more precise. Okay, so now for the second row. And then I can just jump into my yellow. Try to think of my highlight placement. So this is a bit more vibes based, less physics based now. See, I try to give this a bit more flair. Do quite like that. And then again, down here, it is kind of important to have at least the brightest parts be quite opaque here on the color so that the filter can do its work. We didn't just get some muddy color. As a filter will always basically get things darker, never brighter. Oh, I lost my model. Okay. Some last refinement. And with that, going for my orange again. And again, if I'm now not happy with something, like let's say the contrast here, can try to get this a bit darker again. And then once this is dry, to always build your models first and then paint. I find it difficult to reach some areas, so I usually paint first and glue the arms last. Yeah, basically the way that I paint, especially with the underpainting and trying to get a feel for the whole model, I nearly always build the model first and then paint it in fully assembled state. There is, for me, very little exemptions from that. So now for Golden Demon, I also painted in Industra, which I will post soonish. For her, I didn't glue in the wings, and I painted the wings separately, but everything else I had fully assembled. I think I even always had her on the base, so I painted her with like this giant 60mm base. This guy, which I showed earlier, I painted fully assembled, so I had to paint all these parts while reaching into it. So basically the answer is yes, I nearly always build and then paint. But I would not necessarily suggest people to do the same. It's just the way that I like to paint, and I like to see the whole model in front of me when I paint. It doesn't necessarily make it easier. This is quite a lot of gold trim to paint, but let's see how far we get. Not necessarily the best idea for a speed paint, but well, as I said, I just like painting gold, I guess. Okay, there's quite a bit of gold trim, so it's taking quite a lot of time, but we are making good progress. And my 2-hour paint job is looking more and more unrealistic. But let's see. Do I paint miniatures for a living? No, I would love to, but I just do this in my spare time. So I have a PhD in computer science, and I am a team lead at a AI research organization as my day job. But not gonna lie, I do like to think about maybe someday doing this full time. So I'm always giving something like commission painting an idea in the back of my head. Yeah, definitely the dream. I will also soonish start giving painting lectures in physical form. So I will be doing workshops and the like in Germany. But there's still a few things to iron out before I can start with that, but maybe that's the next step in some time, doing miniature painting more as a profession. Okay, let's get this a little bit brighter, some parts. I'm not 100% happy with the trim I've painted here to this point. I think that this looks quite a lot better, but we'll see how I get this to look. Okay, so you can see I'm now doing the filter step again, trying to tie this all together. As you also can see, it matters quite a bit how much of the orange I have on the brush, how much water, how much thinner, because it goes from being barely visible to being actually quite orange. Like down below here, generally what I did below there is probably a bit too heavy-handed, but I hope that I can fix that. It's the next layer of my bright tone. I think I was too heavy-handed down below here with the orange. Trying to be quick, not being too tidy, but hey, it will still look cool in the end. So don't try to worry too much. Again, not my best gold trim that I've painted, but still looking fine. Okay, let's leave it at that for the moment. Going for a small amount of white to tie this in. Okay, so I'll try to be a bit quicker with the rest that I've shown the process quite a few times. Also here, so now we are getting a few reflections on something that is round like this. So basically I have to work with a few different directions of looking at this model at the same time. Try to do a few things in parallel now. It's also a very cool detail of this model that we have the two arm guards, which are asymmetric. So we have something that highlights that he's fighting with one sword. The sword arm is a bit more heavily armored. So we have the same thing that we have on the other one, but also this additional cool looking piece which resembles the shoulder pauldrons quite well. I think I will go for a gold grip of the sword as well, a handle of the sword. Do something like this. And if you're painting in a style like this, where you're working a lot less with fully opaque layers, it's a bit more, it's a bit harder to recreate exact colors. So that's one of the reasons you see why my gold doesn't always turn out exactly the same, as I'm using a lot of different glazes. You will just... Hi there, glad to have you. And thank you. The quant is still something that I want to finish. I think I'll do some further videos on basically doing large scale golden armor on that one, but I postponed those ideas until after Golden Demon. But you will see more of the Grondis in the future. You're interested in how I will paint the sword? Yeah, it will be quite interesting. I think this side of the sword will be quite nice to paint. This one will be rather difficult, as it's mostly angled towards the ground. But we'll see how we handle that. Let's go for more gold first though. And I should be a bit more careful as I am right now and go to a smaller brush. So I'll try to do the rest of the reflections before I do the wash on basically everything. Again, basically I'm trying to sketch reflections here. We'll try to pull this all together later down the line. Up to that point, I'm not interested in smooth blends or anything, even though I will have some glazes in here to help me define the shape. For a second layer. Get contrast higher. You're also reaching quite the interesting patterns drawn onto my finger. As you can see, basically always when I'm going for a new color, I will do a single brush stroke on my thumb to get a feel for the amount of color that I have on my brush and get some color off there. Okay. We're getting a feel for the backside of this model. And again, we will pull this all together with the orange later down the line. This is also basically my quick way of painting gold. If I try to go for something a bit more refined, there are a few more steps in between. Basically doing the same thing then, but just in a bit more of a careful way in trying to get everything a little bit smoother, trying to get everything a bit more vibrant. The steps are mainly the same, just not in the same order, and with a few more steps in between. Okay. So this shoulder pauldron as well. Okay. So we also have this piece of the armor of the arm. Again, here I'm trying to highlight the natural curvature of the metallics. Something like this. I'm not the most careful at the moment, but I'm getting a bit better back to my schedule. So maybe roughly 2 hours for this guy is still in the cards. Let's see. Right now a lot of this looks very rough, but again that is basically on purpose. I will have to try to understand armor on the legs. Give them a quick paint job as well. And yes, I'm speaking of a quick paint job while doing non-metallic metal. That is of course not the most economical way of painting your models. But as I said earlier, I fully committed to painting everything in non-metallic metal because I really just like the look of it. So I'll have to make do. So now here down below I will be a bit more careful. Basically I want to make sure that only things that would basically catch a stray ray of light would have a chance of reflecting it back upwards will get a highlight here, because metals that are closer to the ground have a less likely angle of reflecting into the viewer's eye. And to take care of that, I'm mostly painting edges that are angled in a nice way, and I'm very sparingly applying the highlight colors here. Okay. This can be a bit more pronounced, I think. But now, given all that, let's take a look if I did a good job. So I'm again taking my orange, sending it down into a glaze consistency. get all the warmth in my gold that I like that much. Again, the amount of orange that I use here matters quite a lot. So while it is still wet, I do have some amount of working time going back and forth, glazing it over there. Especially don't want any pooling of the orange. It's really supposed to be a filter and not a wash or something like that. Okay. And doing all this, we are starting to get a feel for how this is supposed to look. And even though it's not the most refined paint job I've ever done, I think we are arriving at something that is looking quite cool. So I am quite happy with how this is turning out. Again, down below here we can be a bit more sloppy. It's not too important as long as we have some reflections down there that give us the feel of metal. We are good. Okay. So now for another round. Of highlights, and then finally for some white, and then we should be done. Here's all the metallics. I think that these last highlights and reflections always do a wonderful job of getting us a feeling of a reflective surface. Okay. I'm basically always trying to experiment a bit with additional forms, additional brush stroke patterns, especially on something like this where I do want it to look nice, but doesn't have to really fit in with anything else that I've painted before. It's just a nice one-off model. It's always a very good canvas to experiment on. And I think that is one of the most important things to get better as a painter, is to not just replicate what you've painted before, but actually trying something new. So I think you can paint like 1,000 Space Marines. If you ever do it in the exactly same style. Of course your brush control will get better, you will get faster at it, but you're not necessarily broadening your skills as much as you could have if you just try to experiment a bit every now and then. Of course, there's also something to be said about comfort food. Just doing something that you know works and is fun for you. Personally, I enjoy experimenting a lot. So now I'm going for my white highlights. Try to punch the contrast up to the maximum. And with that, we are reaching the end of all these golden surfaces. Again, if you're doing this non-metallic metal, no way around it, it will need more time. Can only expedite it so much. But I also think that the result is just very cool, very painterly. And it's also a process that I enjoy quite a lot. I think this is looking quite cool the way it is right now. Okay, so now just noticing that this is also part of the metallics, so let's do a very quick job of those. So I'm not quite sure yet if they will get too much of a primary reflection. I'm going for some orange over the dark red, just to have an idea where it is going. And then let's go for some minor reflections. To get this looking cool. Okay, so now for these flaps on the armor, I would normally do something like that in yellow, but I want additional contrast against the rest of the armor here. So let's see if this looks cool. If we do them in red, let's see if they have enough raised surface to paint them like this. And I do think they have. And I do think that this looks quite nice. So basically, when I'm painting something like this, that is just very much lightly textured, but still has a texture in the way that I wanted to paint. I'm trying to drag the side of my brush over it to catch the surface texture a bit, deposit some paint. I'm always also trying to do all my brush strokes in the direction of the material. So since this is going up to down, I'm also dragging my brush this direction. So even if we have something that paints a little deeper than we actually wanted, it will still be in the same or in the right paint direction. We won't just get a brush stroke that goes horizontal and makes it look weird. There's something to keep in mind also when you're painting something like hair. Basically everything, we want to give it a bit of flow, want to follow it some direction. It's always a good idea to do your brush strokes in the same direction. Okay, I think it could look nicer with a bit more contrast, so I'm going for a second round. Same idea, just a bit brighter. This is also basically the same color, just going for a second round, reaching full opacity. will get you some more here. And I think this is looking very nice. So again here, taking it like this and then dragging the brush like this. This was maybe a bit heavy-handed, but even so, again, since we are going for the right direction at least, it is not looking too shabby. And for last time, and so we have that. Then I want to try to get some of the last colors down to get a feel for the rest of the miniature. And I will basically think that I will paint the sword at the end. So let's start with the skin. I thought about basically painting a black dragonborn, so I will leave it mostly in the underpainting, just going for some grays to highlight it a little bit. I'll try to give the face a little bit of a shine in a second. But right now I do like the contrast that we have in the bright colors of his clothes and the metallics, and then the darkness of his skin. I think that looks quite nice, so I don't want to remove that feature. Just trying to make it look a bit more painted by giving it some minor highlights. For something like that, since the contrast is so low, we really don't have to be too precise. It's also something to keep in mind. The higher your contrast, the more you have to be careful of a single brush stroke. If contrast is low, it will just fade into the rest of the miniature quite nicely. Can give this a bit more punch by accentuating the sides a bit more. Basically, this is what I try to go for. Let's give him bright shining eyes. Don't know if you can see this, but let's see to give this some more. Yeah, have a nice day, Overeat. I was glad to have you here, so you will definitely see the final result. Okay, so I think I will go for some dark browns on the belt and the trousers. Just trying to get some different colors in here. but keep it muted. You don't really want it to draw too much more attention. This was maybe a little bit much, so let's try to distribute it a bit. Again, if this doesn't catch too much in camera, that's basically because I'm not trying to get too much contrast in here. The last thing that I want to do is for someone to look at the model and be, oh, that's a nice trouser at first, because it's really not the focal point of the miniature. So basically the job of something like the trousers is just to fade into the background, to not be too noticeable, just helping making this look painted without it drawing any additional attention. Same will be true for the belt, though the belt does have some more features that will be a bit more interesting later down the line. And what color did you use on skin, or is it also black? Oh, it's a good question. I was going for some charcoal, that's a very dark gray, and then I did some rough highlighting by mixing in some bright off-white, a warm off-white into the gray, just for it to have a little bit of a different color. But it's very subtle, maybe even a bit too subtle, but that is something that we can decide on when everything else is painted, basically. So let's give the trousers and the belt a little bit of a highlight, just to be more in line with the rest of the paint job. And for something like a belt, I like it when the highlights are rather scratchy, basically show you that this is some cracked leather. So just dragging the side of my brush with a bit of a brighter color over here is what I want to do. Then there is some metallic, I'm not sure what exactly they are supposed to be. Some metallic parts on the belt, including of course a belt buckle. I want those to read metallic, so we will make sure that those get a small reflection. And give them this very quick metallic look that you can get on small details by basically just giving them a single small point of reflection. So if you're doing something like non-metallic metal, small details are actually the easiest thing to paint. Big surfaces are a lot harder. Something small something like this is plenty and is enough. Okay, I think we are getting to a state where these have a similar quality. So let's go for the base. I think for the base I want the stones to look a bit like concrete, and then we will have some brownish dust around it. Let's start with the concrete. For that I will also go for my charcoal color. I will just dab this on with a small piece of a makeup sponge here. We'll also use this to get a little bit of a fade between the feet and the concrete slab that he's standing on. So this is something very quick. Generally, when you see me painting, you will notice that I don't spend too much time on my bases. And that's not because I find bases uninteresting or unimportant. But again, I want them to have less contrast than the rest of the paint job. I want them to basically not draw attention, but make this look like a coherent piece. And so I will not go for a very bright thing here, because I want the lower part of the model to fade into the base in a natural way. It makes all look like it belongs together. Just getting some different grays on here. I've now mixed in some brighter color. Give us a tone we can work with. Then say I want this a bit dirtied down on the sides. I want some browns on here. I'll do this exactly the same way. Just try to get them in here. And once I have the basic colors down, I will do a last effort to get them a bit more coherent. Okay, so for a start I like this. I'll now try to get this in a little bit more. But again, I don't want this to draw attention away. This will all be a little bit rougher. Basically, just be the glue for the rest of the paint job. And I think those parts would be some kind of rusted metal. So let's get some browns and oranges in there. Maybe give them small metallic sheen on the end, but that will be all. And I think we can go for slightly brighter edges on here. That's maybe a bit much. Basically just try a bit more interest in there. But again, I don't want this to be like very tidy edge highlights or something like that. I just want them to give a bit more of a feel of the texture that we would have here. So you can see I'm basically stippling on some color into the edges. There are a few more of these metallic spikes. Okay. Now what we have left are the skulls here, or the heads of other Dragonborn, and the sword. Let's start with the sword because I think that's the more interesting feature. At least painting wise. So quickly try to get the makeup sponge cleaned up so that I can use it again. Perfect. Okay, so I want the sword to be a different metallic surface than the gold, but of course I still want it to feel coherent with the rest, so I will try to tie it in with the rest of the metallics from the direction of the reflections, but it will get a different color distribution. Okay, then on the lower part, I want it to reflect a bit of the ground, so we'll go for more of a brown down there. Then also some form of edge highlight. To make this look a bit sharper. Then let's work on the bounce light a bit more. Basically, I try to get a reflection that is on the opposite side of the main reflection. So while the main reflection is at the front of the sword, I will do the secondary reflection at the lower end of the sword. Let's try to get the brightest part of the highlight a bit more pronounced, so it still looks metallic. And then again, for the main side, again, rather bright edge highlight for the metallic feel. Then I'm trying to glaze this up towards something like a brighter tone. Okay, this should dry now for a second. Now for the skulls, I don't want to introduce too many new colors, so I will paint them in a reddish tone, but also rather dark, at least for everything but the final defining highlights. Just to not draw too much attention down here. But even though this is a rather cool detail, it is still a small detail that shouldn't be the main interest point of this model. Basically, if we can make them look kinda reddish, kinda dead, we are good to go. And I think that should be not the biggest problem. I think model-wise they're supposed to be held in place by some chains, so we'll also try to get them looking metallic in a second. Let's first try to get a coherent feel here for the skin. Basically, as soon as we can understand the geometry of the dragons, we are good to go. It's just important that we can look at them and understand just from the model what we are looking at. Okay, so going for the chains, I am trying to get reflections onto singular parts of the chain link. Just to make sure that we can identify it as being a chain and not something else. If you want it to be terribly accurate, painting a chain is quite difficult, but if you just want to have it look roughly metallic, then painting a chain is just giving some shine to some of the chain links, and you will probably be good to go. Now we'll just increase the contrast a little bit more, going for some pale sand. Hopefully without just slathering paint on. Again, just getting a little bit of water on there, draining it will work. So while that dries, let's continue here. It's getting this brighter and brighter. You see, the brighter we get that, the more natural the secondary highlight will look like. Because to get a frame of reference for the brightness. And of course, primary reflection, so the reflection directly from our light source, should be the brightest. That is what we are making sure of here. Okay, just following the form of the sword. So there will still be a little bit of a reflection up here. So try to get this on there, make it look a bit more realistic. Get this on here. And going for the last few steps on the chain here. Okay, I think that is enough for those sides. Wanting to give the little tongue that is sticking out from one of these guys some love. Then I think also the teeth of the same guy. I think that is plenty fine. Then here on the lower side, basically on something like this, I'm mostly just going for something quick, because on a normal viewing angle you won't really notice it. But now here for the main reflection, I will be going even brighter. Getting this in a bit. Finally going for some white. Just really going for maximum contrast up here. Lastly, I want to try to give this this middle ridge of the sword a little bit of a highlight. Let's see if I can make this happen. Basically again by dragging the side of my brush over there. And I think this looks good. Okay, in the interest of time, originally I thought this would take 2 hours. Now it took 2.5. There are certainly still things that we could try to make look even nicer, but I do think this is a fine looking Mr. Dragon, and I will leave it at that. Thank you very much for tuning in, and I hope I catch you in one of my next streams. And until then, have a good one and happy painting. Bye!